So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is the Mr. Media Interview, sponsored by the audiobook edition of Will Eisner's Spirited Life, now available on iTunes and Audible.com, and recorded live on blogtalkradio.com from the new media and the oh-so-briefly American League Baseball capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. This is a tough time to be a writer, whether you're on the staff of a newspaper or magazine or an independent like myself. Layoffs and budget cuts are impacting virtually everyone I know. There are no sure things in the writing game these days. But two things are unchanged. People are actually reading more than ever before, and everybody still thinks their life story would either make a great book or that they're capable of writing the next great American novel. All right, make that three things. One of the best resources for the established or wannabe book author is still keeping a copy of Jeff Herman's Guide to Book Publishers, Editors, and Literary Agents on your desk, and the 2010 edition is hot off the press. I personally have recommended Herman's book to authors in much the same way I recommend the Writer's Marketplace from Writer's Digest to freelance writers interested in exploring article writing. Both are invaluable desktop references, one best for books, one best for articles. As for Herman, I don't even think this is his day job. He makes the bulk of his living from representing writers as a literary agent. At least that's what I think. Jeff, welcome to Mr. Media.
Hi, glad to be here.
Glad to have you here. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I mean, the weather's lousy here in New England today, but that's par for the course.
Well, we got to deal with what we got to deal with. I mean, you get nice summers, right?
Beautiful.
Yeah. So, which is it? At this point in your career, are you making your primary income as an agent, or do the books pick that up?
No, I would say that more than 80% of my time and my revenue is derived from being a literary agent, especially between the traditional hours of 9 to 5. My other work, we find other times to do that.
Got it. And has publishing the books, has it helped that other side of your business?
Oh, immensely. I mean, we're now into our 20th year, 20th edition. It's an annual book. And when I first started doing that book, compiling it and publishing it, I was still in my 20s. And with very little, I'm chronologically in my 20s. And I was not someone who was very well known in the publishing or writing community at that time. I was very much a neophyte. So it certainly helped me sort of have a great calling card and get to know people.
I remember when I discovered your first guide, and I don't remember. It was one of the early editions. It hadn't been around that long, and I think a friend had given me his copy, and I was just like, oh my God, this is great. I don't know who this guy Jeff Herman is and where he got all this information, but it was great, and it sat, and then the subsequent edition sat dog-eared on my bookshelf for years, and I was constantly lending it out to friends who wanted to, try their hand at books. And, when I saw you had a new edition out, it wasn't, it didn't require much thought on my part to say, I got to talk to this guy.
Well, glad to hear it. I do see it as a service. I mean, it's good for me to do it. A lot of the information is public domain information, but yet the value we add is that we compile it and we explain it. We interpret what it means for people who are not living and breathing in this business.
And, I'm glad you mentioned that. I mean, the information, I guess, on the publishers is probably, some of it anyway, is readily available. I'm guessing the agents, a little tougher to get that kind of information.
Yes. Actually, all the information is, it would be very time-consuming for someone to get this information, because the publishers really want to be as invisible as possible to the general public. The publishing industry forever does not just want people sending in raw, unsolicited manuscripts. They don't have in-house screening operations in publishing houses. They actually want the material to be somewhat screened before it arrives in their mailroom or on their internet sites. And that's where the agents play a crucial role, because the agents are actually acting as the policemen and the policewomen for what the publishers will even look at.
Right. I know that one of the greatest things that my agent does for me is that he kind of winnows down I do a lot. What I do is I do a lot of books with people, with CEOs or entrepreneurs or successful people, TV people who want to write a book but don't know how to write a book. And what he does for me, or actually what she does, because I'm using two, they decide who is real and who is saleable, and I don't make that decision, and then therefore I don't waste a lot of time working with people who ultimately are not going to help produce a saleable book. So and the agents, but I noticed, not every agent is in the book either, and I suspect that there are some, like my own, who have opted out in one way or another.
It really depends upon how hungry the agency is for new business, for new clients. The bulk of an agent's time, the priority for the agent, has to be servicing existing clients. Now, most agents are looking for tomorrow's clients, because today's client could become yesterday's client for various reasons. None of us are ever getting younger, for instance, or people may just decide they don't want to write books anymore. So but part of the thrill, at least for me as an agent, is to look for tomorrow's clients, even if I am feeling rather saturated at a certain point. But if a particular agent or agency is saying that basically my door is closed, we really are at our saturation point, there is no reason for them to go out of their way to put their name out there to writers who are looking for agents.
Right. And has it become tougher in that regard, because everybody is so tight? There's not a lot of flab at either the publishers or the agents these days. Did you notice much contraction in terms of the agent listings or even the publisher listings in terms of?
It's interesting. Fewer books are being commercially published by the traditional publishers. More books are being self-published because it's become so economical to do it, and technology creates so many ways to market your book outside of the bookstore network, which is pretty much dominated by traditional publishers. But it's actually become much easier, and will continue to become much easier, to buy and sell information products, which include books, outside of the traditional publishing community. But the traditional publishers have all had contractions in sales. Certain divisions within publishing are actually doing stronger. Romance lines, which have always been the backbone of book publishing in a lot of ways, have actually grown over the past couple of years, probably because their books are priced well. Most of them are paperback. And also other forms of entertainment have become much more expensive, including cable. Including renting, or and everything, renting entertainment or going to a movie. But it has never been easy to get published, because it's a very competitive process. But it's always been far from impossible. And you got to remember, nobody is born published.
Right.
Everyone who's published, they got there by writing a book and playing the game, and it is a game.
You mentioned self-published, and I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I know that there are people who are interested in that. Does it have the same? I don't know. It used to be, people who got self-published were people publishing poetry books or people.
Their autobiography.
Right, and it was things like my life in World War II. No
right.
one but my family wants to read it, but I want it in a book. Has that changed? Are we seeing more legitimate books being self-published?
Yes and no. There's still a lot of that. What is called pure vanity. which is basically then given away to whoever will take a copy. That usually relatives and friends don't have a choice in that matter if they're offered a copy of your self-published memoir. And that's always going to be, and that's fine. You're paying for that. As far as self-publishing in general, it has a lot more legitimacy now. And there's a lot of good product that would be perfectly worthy for any publisher to handle that is being self-published for various reasons. One reason is the person just wasn't able to get access to the right agent or the right publisher at the right time. Just because something is not traditionally published, it doesn't mean that it was unworthy. It just means the person didn't get the right access. There's a lot of good material that doesn't get published, and there's a lot of just okay or mediocre material that does get published. And it's that's part of the meritocracy, is how good you are at getting attention from the powers that be and getting access to people who can actually make a decision. Some people could be very talented at writing, but they have no ability at getting agents and editors to actually pay attention to them. But self-publishing now is considered to be a perfectly fair outlet to get your information out there. And it can be much more profitable because instead of getting $1 to $2 royalty per copy, now all the money goes to you. Also, you have to keep in mind, as a self-publisher, it's very unlikely that you're going to get bookstore distribution. The bookstores are still basically reliant upon their traditional relationships with the book publishers, and they're not looking to have to open up 10,000 accounts with 10,000 self-publishers. It would just be unmanageable. So if you have the capacity to bypass that traditional distribution network and sell the book directly to the public through websites, through radio shows like this one, through seminars, through old-fashioned direct mail, whatever the case may be, you can be commercially very successful.
It would seem like digital will open that up even further in the years to come.
Yes, people are still fumbling around with that, but the future looks very bright. The costs will come down, the logistics will come down, the ease. Basically, it's going to have to bypass hard copy is what will happen. The readers have really opened the door, the things like the Kindle and the Sony Reader, because now you no longer have to deal with printing out and managing a bulky hard copy, even though the delivery was electronic. Now you can keep it in storage, and supposedly, I have not tried one, I have to be honest, but supposedly you can read it, it's at the same quality that it would be as if it were a hard copy. You won't get a headache using a Kindle or a Sony Reader, from what I'm told.
Right. Well, let's come back. I was thinking that when the 2009 edition of your book was published a year ago, that the writer's economy was tough, but not like this. And I'm wondering, how did the economy change your approach to this edition, if at all, and how much further might it change on the next edition?
Well, it's not changing dramatically. It's changing progressively, conditions in the industry. What really started to turn the industry, regardless of the cycles, the economic cycles, was the fact that huge communications conglomerates were stepping in to buy mom-and-pop publishing assets and integrate them into their communication conglomerates. So when I say what's a something like Time Warner, or Viacom, which owns Simon & Schuster and Pocketbooks, or Hachette, which is a huge French conglomerate, which now owns Warner Books, and they've even changed the name. It's not called Warner Books anymore. It's called Grand Central Publishing. A huge German conglomerate owns Bantam, Random House, Crown. So basically, publishing went from being American-based mom-and-pop businesses to being little divisions within huge conglomerates. And now everyone had to answer to stockholders who maybe had no real interest in book publishing. So it began to change that way really about 15, 20 years ago. And that affected the economics because now they were throwing huge chunks of money to get what they would hope would be the big blockbusters. And that left a lot less money for the average writer. And we're still seeing that. If you're not, there's less than 1% of the writers are going to be making seven figures. The other 99% are going to have a very tough time even getting into the six-figure level, let alone the $50,000 level right now with the economics, just as writers. They may have other income.
Right. And my point to my writer friends who are at newspapers and magazines for the past year has been, and I have to always remember this myself, the newspapers and the magazines may be falling by the wayside or shrinking or changing, but I'd be curious your view of this. I think that the basic skills of being able to compose sentences, the channels may change, but the skills are going to continue to be in demand, and probably more so. You just have to find a way to get paid for it.
Exactly. And you see, book publishing has an old-fashioned model, which in a way is going to enable it to outlive probably newspapers and magazines. Newspapers and magazines are very dependent upon advertising, and the advertising is very dependent upon circulation. Book publishing doesn't need advertising. They just need people to buy the book. And it's always been a low-margin business. It's always been a high-volume, low-margin business. Nobody in book publishing, very few people in book publishing have ever gotten rich. They do it because they like it. You write because you like to write, and you publish books because you like to do it. And that's really what's going to be saving it in a lot of ways, because it doesn't have the same avaricious requirements that a lot of other industries have, which is to really generate and maintain huge revenues. And book publishing doesn't have to maintain huge revenues to be what it is.
Now, what are you hearing from your clients and the editors with whom you do business about opportunities out there? Do they see it shrinking, or are they holding fast? What are you hearing?
Okay, it's definitely shrinking. Okay,
I mean, we're agreed on that. Okay.
Right. Less books are getting published. Lists have been cut back. Editors have been let go. What I get from the editors is they all they're worried about their jobs. Who's next to go? Has it stopped? Will there be more massacres? And there's a sense of frustration because editors would probably love to acquire a lot more books than they're allowed to, than the economics will allow them to. Or they're forced to offer much less than they would normally to acquire a certain book, which then makes it uneconomical for the writer to write the book. So it does trickle then down to the writer. The writer all of a sudden, maybe 3 years ago, could have gotten $50,000 advance to write a certain book, and today he may be told, well, we'll give you $15,000 to write the same book. I don't have a scientific model for that, but that's sort of what's been going on. And so everyone is feeling frustrated from that point of view. There's less money moving around at the moment, but that seems to be the case in general.
And digital rights, how are they impacting all this?
Well, the publishers have been very careful to control the digital rights, especially over the past couple of years, because with e-books, they've become much more meaningful. Really, since the 90s, everybody was waiting to see if or what any of this would mean. And now we're starting to see what it'll mean. It basically means e-books. And the publishers, their biggest concern is that if they're not careful to retain the e-book rights, that there'll be a sudden shift at any time in which the hard copy book becomes secondary to the e-book. And all of a sudden they're out of business because they don't have the rights to convert their catalog into e-books. They didn't sign up those rights. So that's why the publisher needs to be very aggressive right now in making sure that they have the e-book right. And a writer needs to really respect why they're doing that, and also realize there's probably nothing you as a writer could do with it anyway, unless you want to start self-publishing.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, coming back to the book, and specifically, what is new this year? It certainly doesn't seem like the book's getting any smaller. Are there things you want to draw people's attention to? Maybe the articles, or are there a new number of listings? What should we know about this year's edition?
Well, what we try to do with each edition, of course, is stay in real time as much as possible about who the editors are by name, who the publishers are that exist or have been remodeled. A lot of the publishers get remodeled every few years. Some disappear, some are revived. And we try to catch up with that and reflect that. And then there's always a lot going on with the agents, especially what they are willing to represent, what they're not willing to represent, and how they want to be contacted and be interacted with. So we try to reflect that. We try to catch as many of the 200 to 300 agents who are looking for new clients as possible to talk to the writer through the book. And then we try to, about 30% of the book is dedicated really to straight essays in which we try to educate the writer about how to actually get an agent and get an editor, or get an editor even if you can't get an agent, and just how to do that. How to create a book proposal, how to create a pitch letter, how to present yourself. Those protocols have not changed and probably will not change so long as book publishing exists. The ways to get published really have not changed. People are using email now a lot more as opposed to regular mail, but otherwise the protocol is really very steady.
What has changed and evolved since the first edition of the book 20 years ago?
Probably potential access to publishers has become even tighter. Because it used to be, especially when there were a lot more, well, the biggest difference is that there used to be many more independent presses of significant size. There's still lots of kitchen table publishing going on. But there used to be a lot of houses which, maybe only had 10 to 20 employees, had, small offices in New York City or other places around the country, and were doing real publishing, and were actually even generating New York Times bestsellers. And the economics have shifted over the past 20 years so that many of these mom-and-pop operations either went out of business or they got swallowed. They got eaten up. And maybe their brand name, the family name, still exists and is still being used, but it's not a independent press anymore. It's now owned by a conglomerate. So and that has diminished opportunities for the average writer because there are less doors to knock on. And these mom and pops used to be very open, relatively speaking, to unagented new writers. They had less money to spend for advances, for instance, so they were willing to bypass agents because agents would tend to want to, push up the price of the book. So that's the biggest change.
Well, before we run out of time, I want to mention another book of yours that I actually just read for the first time, which is Write the Perfect Book Proposal, which you write with your wife, Deborah Levine Herman. There's some pretty smart advice in there as well.
Thank you. Yes. In nonfiction publishing, you are not required to actually write the manuscript, whereas with fiction, you're expected to have the manuscript before you could even shop it to agents and editors. With nonfiction, it's actually preferred that you don't have the manuscript. Really what they want is what's known as a nonfiction book proposal. And once you learn how to structure this proposal, there's sort of an industry protocol for how to structure it. You can generate these things in 10 to 20 hours or even less. And on the basis of the book proposal, you can then get a contract, get the first portion of your advance and get a year to actually write the manuscript, as opposed to writing the manuscript on spec and hoping that someone will acquire it. So what we try to do in this book is we give you 10 real proposals that we've agented over the years, and we reverse engineer them. We show where they were strong. We show where they could have been stronger, and basically use them as models for the reader to follow to create their own book proposal.
I got to speak to Deborah briefly yesterday, and I told her, well, I'll tell you, is I have written and sold a lot of book proposals over the years, and I've always found that whoever my agent is at the time has a specific way that he or she likes to see proposals structured, and then the next person has their own way. And yet, just when I thought that I had seen it all, I've read through this book, and I found more good advice and more tips. So, I wanted to make sure that we got to mention that book, because if you are a writer, if you're working in nonfiction, it is a very useful book, especially if you have not been through the proposal process before, and even if you have.
Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Last question, because we're going to run out of time. What are the most common mistakes that newbies, and for that matter, experienced writers, make in writing a book proposal?
The mistake they make is they're failing to figure out to be original. They've got to realize that there's a very good chance that there's been 1,000 other books written on the same subject over the years. And that's a good thing, because it shows that there's a vibrant marketplace for the concept, for the topic. But it also means they have to now separate themselves from the crowd and not just go with the assumption that they're the first person who's going to be teaching this material. And so the biggest mistake I see is people are not differentiating themselves from other people who are selling the same concept.
Very good. Folks, listen, you can find the 2010 edition of Jeff Herman's Guide to Book Publishers, Editors, and Literary Agents, as well as Write the Perfect Book Proposal, which he's written with his wife, Deborah Levine Herman, in great bookstores everywhere, or you can order it online at mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. And for more information about Jeff and his literary agency, you can surf over to www.jeff.herman, Herman.com. And Jeff, you find I never get tired of talking about books and writing, and it was a lot of fun to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right. Best of luck, and hope we'll get to talk again.
Absolutely. You be well. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jeff. Bye-bye. And, folks, for more interviews about writing, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com. Wow, I hate it when that happens, huh? Wow. That's where you can listen to my earlier conversations with A.J. Jacobs of Esquire, John Darton of the New York Times, 2009 Pulitzer Prize winner for features Lane DeGregory, Writer's Digest editor Jane Friedman, and many more. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, casting a vote for Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen on Blog Talk Radio, blogcritics.org, TrueSlant, Pointer Online, Digital Journal, Vox, Mediafly, Podfeed.net, Blueberry, Zencast, Zimbio, Current, or Odeo. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. Or subscribe to Mr. Media's blog on the Amazon Kindle Reader. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, email me directly at bob@andelman.com. That's ANDELMAN. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, www.twitter.com/Andelman or facebook.com/Andelman. Thanks so much for joining me today. Always appreciate when you give up a piece of your day and spend it with Mr. Media. Thanks for listening, everybody.